So first of all, thank you all for a very interesting session. Dalibor, is there any thought to doing an experiment at a local level? This is practical, right? They could take some city and do it. I mean, these policies are linked to households in some place outside of Cairo.
Well, is this thing working?
Yeah.
Fabulous. Well, actually, whenever there are attempts to reform the system, they typically take place locally, just because Egypt is an enormous country. So, for instance, the introduction of smart cards took place last year, firstly, only in a number of districts in Cairo. And there is a problem of, actually, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. So yes, you can try different things at the local level and see if they work. But in Egypt's case, it's very difficult to scale things up. So there is capacity to do certain things, such as introducing smart cards in urban areas. But it's difficult to extend that elsewhere where government bureaucracies just are in a worse shape than elsewhere. So there will be potential in such a country to do more experiments and try to sort of learn about what works and what doesn't. I don't think that's been done to the extent to which it should.
This is about the Peru and Colombia, and interesting to see the relationship you found. In terms of going beyond blackboard economics, as you're probably aware, there's empirical work and analysis to argue that landowners and tenants can often be, under some conditions at least, quite creative about developing better contracts that align incentives, and similarly that under communal tenure, there are often things that do provide security, and that communal tenure is often actually a mix of communal and private rights that gives incentives to invest. And so the question, in a sense, is to what extent were you able to kind of see how those may be going on and what that means in terms of the comparison of the impact on the privately held versus the communal and sharecropping areas? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. So, yeah, so sometimes I put it very clean, but actually this might be a bit, more complicated in reality than is shown here. And in the case of communal lands, it often involves a mix of private and the communal structure. However, the fact that these lands were owned by a town or a bigger entity that is not clearly ownership, I would, to that extent, expect a different effect than the pure ownership case. But I can certainly extend these findings to include, let's say, if I can find out to what extent there's more private enterprise within the community versus others, I could include that comparison in the study. So, yeah, thanks.
Olga Kaneva, Georgetown University. I have a question for Sebastian Galiani. Can you maybe give an example of the mechanisms that can be put in place to prevent reverse of the reform? And also, do you have empirical part of the paper to test your theory? Because it might be, I think you might probably implement a mechanism that can be self-sustained, or I'm just curious if you tested your theory.
Yeah. So at this stage, I'm basically coming up with some mechanisms that were not ex ante obvious. I didn't have time, but so the Greece example against Argentina could be part of the answer to your question, in the sense that facing similar shocks, right? In one case, the cost of exit were higher, which prevent the reversal of the reform, but also the transfer of money was also higher to Greece from the organization, which is the European Community, compared to what Argentina got from the IMF, for example. And those will be two examples. In terms of going further and testing, I will think that when I finish the theoretical part, I'll see what data is there, what exactly will be desirable to test, and how that could be identified. I haven't got to that yet.
I really enjoyed this panel because you articulated some explicit lessons for would-be policy reformers. And I observed an interesting tension between the lesson, or one of the lessons we heard from Argentina and one of the lessons that we heard from Egypt. So in Argentina, the lesson may be that ambitious reforms may become a target when an anti-reform coalition comes into power. And then in Egypt, one of the lessons was that we should drive, decision makers should drive for quick, encompassing reforms. So is there really a conflict in the lessons that are presented here? And if not, what may be driving the different kinds of recommendations? Is it the nature of the reform or the context?
No, I'm not sure if I want to advance with my research to the point of making recommendations. I'm just trying to, I'm frustrated. I start from some frustration. There's some reforms, there's evidence, empirical evidence that on average they were positive, large welfare gains, and then they get reverted. That should be frustrating, right? In part because I produced some of the empirical evidence that was showing some of the welfare gains, like 10 years ago. So that's one thing. The other thing is this role of organizations. International organizations play a big role in the reform process, and it was not well studied how it entered the political game and what policy actions could be sort of were optimal from a welfare point once you take into account reversal. And so the results I produce are just coming from as it was said many times today, a blackboard model. So I don't want to advance to policy from there, but I think there is some insights that yes, maybe, right, if you are in an environment where there is a political coalition, put it in this way, compared to what we heard in the previous session, so an organization could have money to buy the losers, but the losers don't go away, right? It's not only to buy them the day of the reform, which was kind of the implicit lesson coming from let's say, previous generation models of political economic reform. So what we are saying is they will stay there, and even if you manage to pass large reform where they were not in power, in the next election they might be in power, and 2 elections ahead. And in particular, which is part of the model, I didn't have time to go through all the details, if there is a negative shock, the likelihood of a reversal is going to be larger. Because it's going to change the marginal rate of substitution, right? And from basically the value of reverting the reforms against the cost of them. And so that has to be taken into account. And that is as far as I like to go with what I did in terms of recommendations.
I don't think I have a definitive answer to your question either. I think there might be several different political economy stories that you can tell about reform implementation and reversal, and it might not always be easy to discriminate between them empirically, and they might lead you to different conclusions about costs of reversal and how to design reforms in order to prevent reversal in the future. So I think I suspect that humility is in order, whether in Egypt or Argentina.
Yeah, I have a question for Nick Parker. What was the motivation for the lobby groups for the Dodd-Frank provision? And if they were to learn the lessons that you have identified, would they be open to a change or the removal of that provision?
Well, the human rights group had been lobbying Congress for a while, so there was actually a proposed legislation in 2009 called the Conflict Minerals legislation. I can't remember the exact name, but it died in committee in April of 2009. So they continue to pressure certain lawmakers, and then were able to succeed through the Section 1502 of Dodd-Frank. My understanding of their motivation was that they sincerely, I mean, many of these human rights groups have celebrity spokespeople, actors in Hollywood, who really believe earnestly that purchases, Western purchases of these high-tech items are causing violence in the Congo. There may be a sort of more nefarious political economy explanation. It may be the case that in addition to those factors, there were owners of mineral rights in Australia and other parts of the world that stood to profit from an embargo on imports from the Congo that would lead to more demand for mining in other places of the world. I haven't dug into that terribly deeply, frankly, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's part of the explanation as well. In terms of, I mean, my understanding is that most of the groups have dug their heels in and think that the regulations are ultimately good and that they just need time to work, and that, you know, the disgruntlement, the dissatisfaction with the policy locally that is on the ground in the Congo will ultimately go away when longer-term mineral certification programs are put in place, will improve the situation, and locals will ultimately be able to profit from it. I will say locals, to characterize them in a blanket way, seem very skeptical that the benefits are eventually going to flow. This group in Goma, the Pole Institute, just released a statement recently saying that the legislation's terribly misguided and the long-run goals are unlikely to be realized, and certifying minerals from all these different informal sites is just an impossible proposition.
Nathan Snow, George Mason University. You know, it occurs to me that a common theme underneath each of these discussions and even the other panels earlier today is the presence, unspoken thus far, of transitional gains traps, making it difficult for reforms to happen. It seems that the result is you have to buy out the capitalized interests, but that seems to be politically infeasible in most cases. Is there any hope for teaching the public that the capitalized interests are going to have to be bought out in order to effect real reforms?
Jenny?
Well, whether there is a role for informed public discussion about who gains and who loses from specific economic policies and etc. Of course, I mean, yeah, I mean that's why, I mean, I'm in my line of business, and that's why I suppose many in this room are in their specific lines of businesses. There's also one alternative way of getting around the transitional gains trap, which has been described by another GMU graduate, Diana Weiner-Thomas, in her paper on the Brewers Guilds in Germany, which is technological change. And I think we are going to see a lot of that in the years to come in various areas of life. I'm not sure it has any direct practical implications for Egypt today, but when it comes to energy subsidies, etc., but it has many other practical implications for other areas of life in Western societies, for example.
So one place where that information may be more important is the ones that see of a reform having direct effects and effects that are equilibrium effects. So I saw experimental evidence where subjects have no problem in identifying the gains and losses that are the direct part, because sort of they face it in the game, but just translating in the day-to-day activities they do. But sometimes they have more difficulties inferring what will be the general equilibrium effects of those policies. But then again, can the government or anyone really assess well those equilibrium effects other than the direction? Is less clear.